They called her the barren widow of Clearwater Ridge. And in a town where a woman's worth was measured by the number of sons she could give her husband, that label was a death sentence. For 3 years, Carol Whitmore had walked the dusty streets of this town with her head held high, pretending the whispers didn't cut her like a knife, pretending the pitying looks from other women didn't burn hotter than the desert sun. Her husband, Thomas, had been dead for 2 months. A good man, a kind man, whose disappointment had been a quiet, constant ache in their small home. Now he was gone, and the vultures were circling. Men who saw a woman alone and smelled weakness. Men like Jacob Morrison. He stood on her porch now, his shadow falling over her like a shroud. A big man gone to seed with whiskey and cruelty, flanked by 2 hired guns, who looked like they'd kill a man for a warm beer. This charade has gone on long enough, Morrison sneered, his eyes sweeping over her failing ranch with a predator's glee. A woman can't manage a spread like this, especially not. He let the word hang in the air, a poison dart aimed right at her heart. One like you. The insult was plain. A woman who couldn't even fulfill her most basic duty. A woman God himself had seen fit to leave empty. This is my home, Carol said, her hand inching toward the old rifle leaning against the doorframe. I won't sell. Morrison's laugh was a harsh, ugly thing. Legacy? What legacy? You got no children to leave it to. Face facts, Mrs. Whitmore. You're a barren woman playing at being something you're not. He lunged then, faster than a man his size should move, and his hand clamped around her wrist like a branding iron. His face was close, his breath sour with rot-gut whiskey. I'm making you one last offer. $500, or I'll see you thrown off this land with nothing but the clothes on your back. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. He was going to break her. He was going to take the last piece of Thomas she had left, and that's when she heard it. The soft, rhythmic sound of a single horse approaching. Not the clumsy thunder of a cowboy's mount, but something else. Something graceful and quiet and dangerous. All 4 of them turned. A lone rider emerged from the shimmering heat haze, moving with a power and fluidity that seemed alien to this dusty, broken land. He was tall, his body a symphony of muscle and bronze skin. Long black hair, adorned with a single eagle feather, flowed down his back. His eyes, dark and piercing, locked onto hers. He was Apache. In Clearwater Ridge, that word meant only one thing: danger. But as he dismounted, his presence seeming to suck all the air out of the yard, Carol felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear. It was hope. Morrison's hand went to his gun. What the hell do you want, Apache? The warrior's gaze never left Carol. His voice when he spoke was like the low rumble of distant thunder. The woman is not for sale. Morrison blinked, stunned by the audacity. This ain't your business, savage. This is white man's land. For the first time, the Apache looked at Morrison, and in that look, Carol saw a contempt so profound it made Morrison seem small and pathetic. The land does not belong to loud, fat men, the warrior said calmly. It belongs to those who listen to it, and this land is crying out. He took a step forward, and Morrison's men tensed, their hands hovering over their holsters. The air crackled, thick with the promise of violence. The warrior looked back at Carol, a question in his eyes, and then he said the words that would change everything. Not all things that appear barren are without seed, he said, his voice carrying across the yard with absolute certainty. Sometimes they only wait for the right season to bloom. And in that moment, Carol knew this wasn't just about her ranch anymore. A fuse had just been lit, and it was leading to an explosion that would burn Clearwater Ridge to the ground. Morrison and his men left in a cloud of dust and impotent curses, but his final threat echoed in Carol's ears. The bank won't wait forever. He was right. Thomas had taken out a loan to buy a new bull just before he died, and the payments were coming due. Without a herd to sell, she'd be ruined by winter. But it wasn't the bank that kept her awake that night. It was the Apache's words. Not all things that appear barren are without seed. It was a cruel hope, a spark in the suffocating darkness of her life. For 3 years, she and Thomas had tried. They had prayed, they had visited doctors in Santa Fe who offered useless herbs, And even more useless advice. They had timed their couplings to the cycles of the moon, to the advice in women's almanacs, to the desperate whispered remedies of the townswomen. Nothing. The result was always the same. An empty womb and a heavier heart. Thomas had tried to hide his sorrow, but she saw it in his eyes every time he looked at Martha Sullivan's brood of laughing, screaming children. The day after the confrontation, Carol walked her property line, her eyes scanning the parched earth. Thomas had always said the land was good, just stubborn. It needed a firm hand. But now, looking at the cracked soil and withered grass, it felt as desolate as her own body. As she neared the old well, her foot caught on something. A small plant, with deep green, almost waxy leaves and a tiny, tightly closed purple bud she'd never seen before. It was growing in a place where nothing else did, right at the base of the well stones, nourished by the dampness that seeped through. It seemed out of place, a small, vibrant secret in a world of brown and gray. She touched a leaf. It was cool, almost alive against her skin. She thought nothing more of it until 3 days later. She was by the river, her back aching as she filled 2 heavy buckets, when she felt a presence behind her. She didn't need to turn around. The air had changed, charged with the same energy she'd felt in her yard. He stood on the bank, as silent as a mountain cat. Ayana. He told her his name, which meant eternal blossom in his tongue. It was a name chosen by his mother, who believed he would bring new life wherever he walked. The irony was a bitter pill. "The man Morrison," Ayana said, crouching beside her. "He will not stop." "I know," Carol whispered, unable to meet his gaze. "He does not want your cattle. They are scattered and thin." Ayana's eyes scanned the distant hills. "He wants the land." "It's all I have left." "It is more than you know," he said, his voice low and intense. He looked at her then, his eyes searching her face. "My people lived in these hills before the soldiers came. We called this place the soil of new life. The women who had trouble conceiving would come here. They would make a tea from a special root." Carol's heart began to hammer against her ribs. "What root?" Ayana's gaze drifted past her, toward her ranch house in the distance. "It grows only in damp, dark places, near deep water. It is very rare." The image of the small, purple-budded plant by her well flashed in her mind. It couldn't be. It was impossible. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because I saw the way Morrison looked at you," Ayana said. "He looked at you with the same disgust he shows the land. He calls you both barren. He is wrong." His hand moved slowly until his fingers brushed against hers on the bucket handle. A jolt, like lightning, shot up her arm. It was the first time a man had touched her with anything but pity or duty in months. This was different. This was recognition. "I saw his men," Ayana continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Weeks ago, near your property line. They were not looking for cattle. They were digging." The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see. Morrison wasn't just a greedy bully. He was searching for something, something on her land, something he believed was more valuable than a few dozen cows. "The white soldiers search for my band," Ayana said, rising to his feet. "It is not safe for me to be here, but this is not finished." He looked down at her, and the fierce warrior was gone, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. "You feel it too, this thing between us." She did. It was terrifying and exhilarating, a wild, dangerous current pulling her out to sea. Everything she had ever been taught screamed that this was wrong. He was a savage, an enemy, but he was the only person who had ever looked at her and not seen something broken. "The failing was never yours," he said, as if reading her deepest, most shameful thought. His voice was absolute. None of it. Before she could process his words, he was gone, melting into the willows along the riverbank. Carol stood alone, the weight of the water buckets forgotten. Morrison didn't just want her land. He was after a secret her land held, a secret that might be tied to the one thing she had always been denied. And a terrifying thought took root in her mind. What if her barrenness wasn't a curse from God? What if it was something else entirely? The idea was madness. a poison born from a handsome stranger's cryptic words and her own desperation. But it wouldn't let her go. Carol found herself replaying every moment of her marriage, searching for clues she might have missed. Thomas had been healthy, strong as an ox until the last few months. The town doctor, old Doc Harrison, had called it a wasting fever. But it hadn't been like any fever she'd ever seen. There was no sweat, no delirium. Just a slow, steady fading, as if the life was being methodically drained from him. And her own condition, for 3 years, a constant, low-grade malaise, a weariness in her bones that no amount of sleep could cure. Everyone, including her, had dismissed it as melancholy, the sadness of a childless wife. What if it wasn't sadness? She thought of the townswomen. Martha Sullivan, with her cloying sympathy and constant deliveries of home-baked bread and herbal tonics. "To build up your strength, dear," she'd always say. Mrs. Patterson, who always had a special blend of tea for female complaints. Had their kindness been a mask? It seemed impossible. Why would they do such a thing? But then she remembered the look in their eyes. It wasn't just pity. It was a kind of satisfaction, the satisfaction of the fruitful looking upon the barren. It affirmed their own place in the world, their own success. Her failure made them feel secure. Driven by a terrible new suspicion, Carol took the tonic Martha had brought her just last week and poured a little into the chicken's water trough. The next morning, 3 of her healthiest hens were dead. The world tilted on its axis. She sat on her kitchen floor, the empty tonic bottle in her hand, gasping for air. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't a failure of her body. She had been poisoned, systematically for years. Someone in Clearwater Ridge had been feeding her a slow-acting poison to ensure she never conceived an heir. And Thomas. Oh God, Thomas. Had he found out? Was that why he had died? Had his fever been a final, lethal dose to silence him? Her grief, once a quiet, sorrowful thing, transformed into a white-hot rage. They had not only stolen her chance at motherhood, they had murdered her husband. She knew she couldn't go to the sheriff. He was a weak, pliable man who did whatever Morrison told him to. She had no proof, only dead chickens and a wild story. They would call her a hysterical widow, driven mad by grief. There was only one person she could trust, the man who had planted the first seed of doubt. Ayanna. She waited until nightfall, then built a fire in her hearth, just as he had instructed her by the river. Not with dry oak, but with green pine. It would create a specific kind of smoke, a signal he said he would be watching for. For 2 days she waited, her rifle never far from her hand. She ate nothing, drank only water from the well, fearing everything else. Every shadow seemed to be one of Morrison's men. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep on her porch. On the 3rd night he came. He slipped into her cabin as silently as the moonlight, a ghost of the wilderness. She told him everything, about the dead chickens, about Thomas's strange illness, about her suspicions. He listened without interruption, his face an unreadable mask of granite. When she was finished, he walked to the window and looked out at the dark expanse of her land. "The root that grows by your well," he said, his back still to her. "My people call it stonebreaker. It does not create life. It fights the poisons that prevent it. It purifies the body." Carol stared at him, her mind reeling. The plant wasn't a fertility herb. It was an antidote. "Morrison knows the legend," Ayanna continued. "He does not want it for his own women. The white man's doctors are discovering new things. They pay fortunes for rare plants from the wild. He wants to dig it all up, sell it, and become a rich man. Your husband stood in his way. An heir would have stood in his way forever. So that was it. Greed. A motive as old and ugly as the desert itself." "What do we do?" Carol whispered, the question sounding fragile in the heavy silence. Ayanna turned from the window. The moonlight caught his eyes and they burned with a cold fire. "A man who poisons the earth and the water," he said, his voice a low growl, "deserves to be buried in it." He came closer, his presence filling the small cabin. He reached out and gently touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "But first," he said, his voice softening, "we prepare the soil for a new season." He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of gentle comfort. It was a kiss of raw, desperate need, of two lonely souls finding an anchor in a storm. It was a kiss that promised not gentle love, but righteous vengeance. And as she kissed him back, pouring all of her rage and grief and newfound hope into it, she knew she was crossing a line. She was leaving the respectable world of Carol Whitmore, the sad, barren widow, behind forever. And she didn't care. All she wanted was to watch Jacob Morrison's world burn. That night, under the silent gaze of 1,000 stars, Carol's lonely cabin became a war room. They were two people against a town, against a conspiracy built on greed and prejudice. But for the first time, Carol felt powerful. Ayana's presence was a shield, his certainty a weapon. He had her fetch the stonebreaker root. He cleaned it with practiced hands and brewed a dark, bitter tea. "Drink," he commanded. "It will be hard on you, but it will wash the poison from your blood." It was the foulest thing she had ever tasted. Her body rebelled, convulsing as a violent sickness purged the years of accumulated toxins. Ayana held her, his strength unwavering, murmuring words in his own tongue until the ordeal passed. She fell into an exhausted sleep, feeling scoured clean from the inside out. When she woke, the sun was streaming through the window, and Ayana was gone. A fresh bucket of water sat by her bed, and on the table was a rabbit, skinned and ready for the pot. He was a ghost, coming and going as he pleased, but his presence lingered. The next day, Carol went to town. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. She walked into Henderson's general store, her head held high, and looked Martha Sullivan square in the eye. Martha was there with two other women, their heads together, whispering. They fell silent the moment Carol entered. "Good morning, ladies," Carol said, her voice clear and steady. Martha's smile was as brittle as spun sugar. "Carol, dear, we were so worried. We haven't seen you." "I've been feeling unwell," Carol said, letting her eyes drift to the basket on Martha's arm, which held a jar of her famous peach preserves. "But I'm feeling much stronger now. I think I finally figured out what was making me sick." A flicker of something, fear, crossed Martha's face. The other women shifted uncomfortably. Carol bought her flour and salt, paid old Jake Henderson, and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "Martha," she said, her voice dangerously sweet, "those tonics you brought me were so potent. I gave some to my chickens. They haven't been this quiet in years." She didn't wait for a response. She walked out, leaving a stunned, guilty silence in her wake. The first shot had been fired. Let them wonder what she knew. Let the fear fester. That night, Ayana returned. He brought with him a small, leather pouch. "The poison they used," he said, emptying the contents onto the table. It was a fine, grayish powder. "It comes from a mushroom that grows on rotted riverwood. It does not kill quickly in small amounts. It just empties." "How can you be sure?" "My grandfather was a medicine man. He taught me the plants that heal and the plants that kill." He looked at her, his expression grim. "Morrison was careless. He bought this from a trader 2 towns over, a man who owes my people a debt. Morrison told him it was for killing wolves." Proof. It wasn't enough for a court, but it was enough for them. "So we have the who, the what, and the why," Carol said, her hands clenched into fists. "Now we need the how. How do we prove it?" "We don't prove it to the white man's law," Ayana said, his voice cold. "That law is a snake that bites the weak and bows to the rich. We prove it to the town. We make them see the monster they have been living with." His plan was simple and terrifying. Morrison was arrogant. He believed he was untouchable. He believed Carol was a weak, stupid woman. They would use that arrogance against him. The next week was the annual Founders' Day picnic. The whole town would be there. It was a day of celebration, of speeches and feasting. Morrison, as the town's most prosperous rancher, would be the guest of honor. He would give a speech, basking in the admiration of the people he was slowly poisoning. "He will be expecting you to be broken," Ayana said. "He will expect you to hide in your home. Instead, you will go to the picnic. You will wear your best dress. You will smile, and you will challenge him." "Challenge him how?" Ayana's lips curved into a dangerous smile. "With the truth." He spent the next few days teaching her. He took her to the river, showing her the ugly gray mushrooms the poison was made from. He had her gather them. He took the empty tonic bottle from Martha and had Carol fill it with a new mixture, crushed berries and river water that looked identical to the original tonic. The final piece of the plan was the most dangerous. It required a level of trust that defied all logic. At the picnic, Ayanna said, the night before the event, you will publicly accuse him. You will tell them he murdered your husband and tried to poison you. He will laugh. The town will call you crazy, and then you will offer him a drink. He pointed to the refilled tonic bottle. He won't drink it, Carol said, her heart pounding. He will, Ayanna insisted, to prove his innocence, to mock you. He will make a show of drinking your poison to prove it's harmless. But what's in the bottle? She asked. Nothing, Ayanna said. Just berry juice. But he won't know that. And when he drinks it, he paused, his eyes locking with hers. That's when I will make my move. But you have to trust me. No matter what happens, you cannot show fear. He was asking her to stand alone in front of the entire town and accuse a powerful man of murder, armed with nothing but a bottle of berry juice and the promise of a ghost's intervention. It was the gamble of her life, and she agreed without a moment's hesitation. Founder's Day dawned bright and painfully clear. Carol dressed in the blue cotton gown Thomas had loved, the one that brought out the color of her eyes. It felt like a lifetime ago. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The woman looking back was not the timid, grieving widow of a few months ago. Her eyes were clear, her jaw was set. There were shadows of exhaustion under her eyes, but for the first time, she saw a flicker of the woman she was meant to be, a fighter. She walked to town, carrying a small basket. Inside, nestled amongst a clean linen cloth, was the bottle of fake tonic and a small, cloth-wrapped bundle of the poisonous gray mushrooms. The picnic was in full swing on the town green. Laughter and music filled the air, a grotesque counterpoint to the mission she was on. She saw them all. Martha Sullivan avoiding her gaze. Mrs. Patterson, whispering furiously behind her fan. The sheriff, already red-faced from celebratory whiskey, laughing with Morrison. Jacob Morrison was in his element. He was dressed in a ridiculously expensive suit, sweat beading on his florid face. He was holding court, a king on his rickety throne of lies and stolen land. When he saw Carol approaching, his eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed into a contemptuous smirk. Perfect. He was underestimating her. She waited. She endured the stares and the whispers. She forced herself to make small talk with old man Henderson, who gave her a look that was surprisingly kind, almost knowing. Then the moment came. The sheriff called for quiet, and Jacob Morrison strode to the makeshift stage. He launched into a pompous speech about progress, about the strength of their community, about a future built on hard work and clear vision. It was all Carol could do not to scream. When he finished, to a round of polite applause, she made her move. "Mr. Morrison," she called out, her voice ringing out in the sudden silence. Every head turned toward her. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Morrison's face clouded with irritation. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is hardly the time or the place." "I think it's the perfect time," she said, walking slowly toward the stage. "You speak of community and honesty. I want to talk about that too. I want to talk about my husband, Thomas." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. "I want to talk about his death," Carol continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "And I want to talk about the poison that killed him." The murmur turned into a roar of shocked disbelief. The sheriff started forward, but Morrison waved him back, a smug, amused look on his face. He had decided to humor the hysterical widow. "Poison?" Morrison said, laughing. "My dear woman, grief has clearly addled your mind. Everyone knows Thomas died of a fever." "Did he?" Carol shot back, now standing at the foot of the stage, forcing him to look down at her. "Or was it this?" She reached into her basket and held up the bundle of gray mushrooms. "A poison made from these, the same poison that was fed to me for 3 years to keep my womb barren. The same poison one of your men bought in the next town over, telling the trader it was for wolves." Morrison's face went pale. For a split second, the mask of arrogance slipped, and she saw the cornered rat beneath. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He threw his head back and laughed, a loud, booming performance for the crowd. "She's mad! The poor woman is insane!" The crowd was with him. They were shaking their heads, whispering about her fragility, her tragic decline. She was losing. This was the moment, the final gamble. "Am I?" Carol said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. She reached back into her basket and pulled out the tonic bottle. "Then you won't mind proving it. Here, a gift from my dear friend, Martha Sullivan." She held the bottle up to him. "Drink it. Drink it all. Show them all how harmless it is. Show them what a crazy, grieving widow I am." The crowd fell completely silent. All eyes were on Morrison. It was a brilliant trap. If he refused, it was an admission of guilt. If he drank it, he would be calling her bluff, cementing her as a lunatic in the eyes of the town forever. His arrogance won. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He snatched the bottle from her hand. "It would be my pleasure to put an end to this ridiculous fantasy," he declared to the crowd. He uncorked the bottle. He put it to his lips. Carol's heart stopped. She had to trust Ayanna. She had to trust the plan. Morrison tilted his head back and drank. He drained the entire bottle in a few large gulps, then slammed it down on the table. He grinned triumphantly at the crowd, then turned to Carol, his eyes glittering with malice. "There! Are you satisfied, you mad—" He never finished the sentence. His eyes widened. A look of sheer terror washed over his face. He clutched at his throat, his breath coming in ragged, choking gasps. His face began to turn a horrifying shade of purple. He stumbled backwards, his hands clawing at his neck, his legs collapsing beneath him. He hit the stage with a heavy thud, convulsing, foam spewing from his lips. Panic erupted. People screamed. The sheriff stared, frozen in drunken shock. Martha Sullivan shrieked and fainted dead away. Carol stood perfectly still amidst the chaos, her face a mask of cold fury. And then she saw him. On the roof of Henderson's store, a silhouette against the bright blue sky. Ayanna. He held a long, hollow reed to his lips, a blowgun. In his other hand, he held a tiny, almost invisible dart. A dart she knew instantly that had been tipped with the real, concentrated poison from the gray mushrooms. He had fired it with impossible speed and accuracy, striking Morrison in the neck the exact moment he had started to drink. No one had seen it. All they had seen was Jacob Morrison drinking the tonic she gave him and then dying a horrific, agonizing death. In the eyes of Clearwater Ridge, she was no longer a barren widow. She was a murderess. The world exploded into chaos. Men rushed the stage. Women screamed and gathered their children, their faces masks of terror and accusation. The sheriff finally jolted from his stupor, drew his pistol, his eyes wild with confusion and fear. He pointed it at Carol. "Don't move," he slurred, his hand trembling. You killed him." Carol didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her own eyes as cold and hard as river stones. She saw Ayanna slip from the rooftop, vanishing as silently as he had appeared. He had done his part. Now it was up to her. "I didn't kill him," she said, her voice cutting through the pandemonium. "The truth killed him." But no one was listening. They saw only what their eyes had shown them. A woman scorned, a bottle, and a dead man. They were closing in on her, a mob fueled by fear and years of simmering resentment toward the woman who was different, the woman who was a walking reminder of failure. This was their chance to excise her, the barren blight on their perfect, fruitful community. Just as the first man lunged for her, a new voice cracked through the air like a bullwhip. "Stand down!" The crowd parted. Old man Henderson, the quiet, unassuming owner of the general store, stood there. But he wasn't the stooped, flour-dusted shopkeeper they all knew. He stood tall, his eyes sharp and clear, and in his hand was not a ledger, but a massive, gleaming Colt peacemaker, held with the casual familiarity of a man who had used it many times before. "Sheriff," Henderson said, his voice calm but radiating an authority that made the drunken lawman flinch. "Put your weapon away before you shoot your own foot off." "But Jake, she did nothing," Henderson said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "And I can prove it." He turned his sharp gaze on Martha Sullivan, who was being fanned by two other women. Martha, tell them. Tell them what you put in those tonics you so kindly brought to Carol's house every week. Martha's eyes went wide with terror. I I don't know what you're talking about. It was just herbs for strength. Was it? Henderson said, taking a step toward her. Or was it the little gray powder that Jacob Morrison paid you for? The powder he told you would just ensure that poor, barren Carol never had to suffer the shame of a child she couldn't care for? The crowd gasped. Martha began to sob, her carefully constructed mask of piety crumbling to reveal the ugly jealousy beneath. He said it was harmless. He said it was God's will. Tell that to Thomas Whitmore. Henderson's voice was like ice. Because when Thomas started getting suspicious of his wife's constant illness, Morrison paid you to double the dose in his food. It was all out now. The whole sordid, poisonous secret laid bare under the afternoon sun. The townspeople looked from Martha's weeping form to Morrison's grotesque corpse, and then to Carol. The accusation in their eyes was replaced by something else, dawning horror and a deep, gut-wrenching shame. They hadn't just been gossips. They had been accomplices, their petty cruelties providing the perfect cover for a murderer. How do you know all this? The sheriff stammered. Henderson reached into his coat and pulled out a small, silver star. It was tarnished with age, but unmistakable. Because before I bought a store, I was a Texas Ranger, he said quietly. I retired here for a quiet life, but I never stopped keeping my eyes open. I've been watching Morrison for years. I knew he was a snake. I just needed him to show his fangs. He held up a small notebook. I have sworn statements. From the traitor who sold him the poison, from one of Morrison's own ranch hands, who confessed everything last night in exchange for a bottle of whiskey and a clear conscience. He had been working his own investigation all along. He had been Carol's silent guardian, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ayanna hadn't been her only ally. The truth, when it finally comes, is like a flood. It washes away all the lies, leaving only the stark, clean bedrock of what is real. Jacob Morrison wasn't a pillar of the community. He was a murderer. Martha Sullivan wasn't a pious friend. She was a jealous conspirator. And Carol Whitmore. She wasn't a barren widow. She was a survivor. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness swept over her. The world swam before her eyes. The emotion, the fear, the adrenaline. It all came crashing down. She stumbled, and strong hands caught her before she could fall. It was Doc Harrison. He had pushed through the crowd, his face grim. He helped her to a nearby bench, his old professional hands checking her pulse. "You're all right, child," he murmured, his voice low so only she could hear. Just overwhelmed. He looked at her, his eyes full of a deep, ancient sadness. "I'm sorry, Carol. I suspected. About the poison. I saw the signs in Thomas, but I couldn't prove it. I was a coward." "You know now," she whispered, her strength failing. "Yes." He put a gentle hand on her stomach. His eyes widened, and he looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw the subtle changes, the new light in her eyes, the almost imperceptible fullness of her figure. A slow, wondering smile spread across his weathered face. "My God," he breathed, a look of pure awe in his eyes. "The failing was never yours. That Apache." His words. "Not all things that appear barren are without seed." He looked from her face to her still flat belly. "Carol," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "it's a miracle. The poison is gone, and there's life here. You're with child." The revelation struck the town square with the force of a thunderclap. Carol, the barren widow, was pregnant. The words passed from person to person in stunned whispers, undoing years of cruel certainty in a single moment. The child she carried was not just a baby, it was a symbol. It was proof of her innocence, a testament to the depth of Morrison's evil, and a living condemnation of their own blind prejudice. Shame is a powerful thing. It settled over Clearwater Ridge like a shroud, silencing the whispers, bowing the heads of the self-righteous. Martha Sullivan was taken into custody, her wails of denial falling on deaf ears. Morrison's men, leaderless and exposed, scattered like rats from a sinking ship. The world had been turned upside down, and when it settled, Carol Whitmore stood at the center of it. No longer an outcast, but a figure of impossible strength and resilience. In the days that followed, a strange procession made its way to her small ranch. One by one, the townswomen came, not with tonics and pity, but with offerings of peace. Freshly baked bread, quilts for the coming baby, jars of preserves. They didn't say much. They couldn't. What apology could possibly suffice for years of cruelty? But in their averted eyes and hesitant gestures, Carol saw the beginning of something new. Forgiveness was a long way off, but understanding had begun to take root. She didn't see Ayana. He had melted back into the wilderness, his purpose served. But she felt him everywhere, in the hawk that circled over the valley, in the silent strength of the mountains, in the steady, thrumming heartbeat of the new life growing inside her. He had come to her like a desert storm, washing away the poison and leaving the ground fertile for a new beginning. Winter came, blanketing the land in a quiet layer of white. The ranch, once a symbol of her failure, became her sanctuary. Old Man Henderson, Jake, as he now insisted she call him, came by once a week with supplies, his silent presence a comforting reassurance. Doc Harrison visited regularly, his initial awe settling into a gentle, protective care. One night, as a blizzard raged outside, her time came. It was Jake who delivered the child, his old ranger hands surprisingly gentle and sure. As the first cry of a newborn baby echoed through the small cabin, a sound Carol had prayed for years to hear, the old life of the barren widow died forever. She had a son, a beautiful, healthy boy, with his mother's dark eyes and a strength that seemed to radiate from his tiny body. She named him Thomas Ayana Whitmore, a name that honored the husband she had loved and the warrior who had saved her. Spring arrived, and with it, a sense of rebirth. The land came alive, awash in the vibrant colors of wildflowers. The stone breaker, plant by the well bloomed, its single purple flower a quiet promise of healing. Carol, with her son cradled in her arms, felt a peace she had never known. Her life was not what she had imagined, but it was full. It was hers. She was on her porch one warm afternoon, rocking the baby, when she saw a rider approaching. Her heart leaped, but it was not Ayana. It was a young boy from his tribe. He dismounted and approached her, his face solemn. He handed her a small, intricately beaded leather pouch. Inside was a single, perfect eagle feather. "He watches," the boy said in stilted English. "He says the blossom is eternal. He will see him when he is a man." And then he was gone. Carol clutched the feather, tears streaming down her face. It was not a promise of a future together, but something more profound. It was a recognition, a blessing, a promise that the connection they shared would endure, woven into the life of the son they had created. She looked down at the baby in her arms, his tiny hand wrapped around her finger. He was her legacy. He was her proof. In a world that had tried to define her by what she lacked, she had found her strength, her purpose, and her joy. The whispers in Clearwater Ridge had finally blessedly fallen silent. All that was left was the wind and the quiet, steady beat of two hearts, where there had once been only one. The story of Carol Whitmore is a testament that the deepest roots can grow in the most damaged soil. It's a reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. If her journey from despair to hope touched your heart, it would mean the world if you'd hit that subscribe button and join our community. We believe in the power of stories to change the way we see the world, and every new subscriber helps us share these tales of resilience and unexpected love. What part of Carol's fight for justice shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you for listening.